The year was 1847, and the air across the low country of Carolina was heavy with the scent of jasmine and the unspoken weight of sin. This was the land of Senator Silas Thorne, whose estate, Thornwood, was less a plantation and more a dynasty carved out of cotton and human misery. Senator Thorne was a man who believed in the absolute, sacred right of ownership, not just over his land and his chattel, but over the will and destiny of his only daughter, Lydia. Lydia Thorne was 20 years old, a young woman of sharp intellect and inherited pride, suffocating beneath the layers of silk, lace, and expectation that defined her rank. She was beautiful, brittle, and deeply resistant to the one command her father required: marriage to a neighboring, dull-witted planter who offered political leverage and nothing else. Her defiance, a polite, intellectual refusal presented over Sunday dinner, was, in Silas's view, not just disobedience but treason against the Thorne legacy. The senator saw her as a strategic asset, and assets must be managed. The master, Senator Thorne, did not shout. He did not issue physical threats. His punishment was designed to be psychological, a cold, calculated lesson in social hierarchy, meant to humble and break the spirit that dared to question his supreme authority. "You believe yourself above labor, Lydia," the senator had stated, his voice a low, chilling current, yet carrying the weight of Carolina law and history. His eyes, the color of gunmetal, held a terrifying, immovable conviction that reflected generations of inherited power. "You believe your will is your own. You lack discipline. Very well. You shall learn obedience from the very foundation of this society, from the ground up, where life is truly defined by dominion. For the next month you will live and work in the quarters. You will take orders from the overseer, you will eat their fare, and you will learn exactly what true subjugation feels like. You will understand the value of the soft ground I give you to stand on. When you return, you will have learned the value of choosing the soft chain I offer you, the one gilded with gold and status, over the hard chain that binds the undisciplined." The sentence was delivered with the precision of a surgeon's cut, severing her connection to her former life instantly. It was a humiliation designed to make her yearn for the drawing-room floorboards, to beg for the return to her gilded cage, and to accept the stifling inevitability of her marriage. The senator relied on the swift psychological revulsion of privilege faced with raw poverty and despair. It was unthinkable. A white woman, the daughter of a senator, forced into the grime and terror of the quarters. The senator believed she would last 3 days before the stench. The hardship and the sheer animal fear drove her back, weeping and compliant, ready to accept the dull planter and her political marriage. Her mother, a frail woman whose own spirit had been crushed years ago beneath Silas's quiet, suffocating will, stood by the mantelpiece. She could only offer a silent, tearful exchange of glances, a desperate, unspoken apology for the impotence of her own compliance. She was a ghost confined to the velvet silence of the main house, witnessing the chaining of her daughter's spirit to a worse fate. The overseer, a squat, brutish man named Jensen, received the orders with a smirk that was part lust, part vicious amusement, sensing a temporary shift in the dynamics of control. He saw not the master's daughter but a new opportunity for power, a twisted prize to be wielded, albeit one temporarily restricted by the senator's strict command. Lydia was stripped of her fine clothes, her delicate French leather shoes replaced by rough, patched leather. She was given 2 coarse, ill-fitting shifts, fabric so rough it scratched her skin like sandpaper, and marched across the main lawn toward the dense, smoky haze where the slave cabins huddled like dark, broken teeth. The final glance she caught of the main house was of its pristine white columns, a false facade guarding a heart of absolute moral rot, now revealed to her as a prison, not a sanctuary. The sensory assault began instantly. The smell hit her first: wood smoke, sweat, lye, and a deep, pervasive scent of unwashed human despair and fear, overlaid with the sour smell of fermentation from the mash pots. It was the scent of a different world, a raw, organic reality she had successfully ignored for 20 years, a hidden foundation of horror that supported her fragile life of comfort. The transition was a physical and moral shock. The initial hours were a blinding terror. She was placed in the kitchen, under the sharp, cynical eye of the cook, Mama Elma. Mama Elma was a woman whose hands were scarred and strong, whose gaze contained the collective, bitter history of Thornwood. Her eyes assessed Lydia not with malice, but with a weary, knowing detachment, reserving her judgment for the master who orchestrated this twisted lesson. The other enslaved women watched her with expressions ranging from mute suspicion to outright hostility. They saw her fine skin, her soft hands, her obvious panic, and they saw a dangerous, unpredictable toy of the master, meant only to mock their existence. They did not pity her. They resented the power her suffering still contained, the knowledge that her discomfort was temporary, unlike their own endless sentence. Lydia was ordered to scrub heavy iron pots, pots thick with dried grease and black soot. The work instantly shredded the soft skin of her palms, the raw, burning pain a physical education far faster than any of her tutor's lessons in philosophy or French. The blistering was immediate, the lye and grease burning into the exposed flesh like acid. She slept on a dirt floor, the rough woven mat scratching her skin, the constant movement, low murmurs and rhythmic breathing of the shared cabin a perpetual, suffocating presence. Every muscle in her body screamed from the unaccustomed labor, a relentless, cumulative pain she had never known existed. The first 2 days were exactly what her father had planned, a relentless, humiliating physical battering that stripped away her superficial dignity and the arrogance of her class. She cried once silently, convulsing with suppressed sobs into her knees near the cold hearth, tasting the salty grit of the dirt and the coppery fear of her own weakness and the terrible permanence of the poverty she was sampling. But on the third morning something profoundly shifted. Her hands were blistered and bloody, but they were also tough. The blood on her palms dried to a dark crust, hardening the skin beneath, forming calluses that were proof of a new endurance. Her back ached, her legs throbbed, but she found a rhythm, a mechanical necessary swing of the arm, a steady lift of the pot, a controlled movement of her breath. The world slowed down to the immediate vital needs of survival. She focused on the ache, using it as a shield to eclipse the shame and the terror. And that is when she saw him, truly saw him for the first time. His name was Caleb. He worked in the fields, a man of profound stillness and contained energy, his gaze level and piercing. He was powerful, not with the brute, swaggering power of the overseer, but with a contained, intellectual strength that radiated from him like heat. He had a natural authority that surpassed any title. The other field hands respected him. The overseer, Jensen, watched him with wary, contained malice, knowing this man possessed a dangerous, unquantifiable commodity, inner autonomy and a mind that calculated more than cotton rows. Lydia first encountered him when she was fetching water from the well, struggling under the weight of the yoke. Her arms were shaking, the heavy bucket swaying, threatening to drench her. Caleb was standing nearby, watching her, his arms crossed. His eyes, a deep, intelligent brown, did not hold the pity she might have expected, nor the resentment. They held a profound, unsettling curiosity, as if she were a scientific specimen suddenly placed in the wrong environment, a fish pulled from a silk-lined bowl. He was observing her failure with the detachment of an academic studying a failing hypothesis. She stumbled, her footing slipping on the damp earth. Caleb moved, not quickly but precisely, steadying the yoke with a single firm hand on the rough wooden bar. The contact was brief, impersonal, yet electric. Her skin, used only to the smooth touch of linen and silk, reacted violently to the hard, warm muscle of his hand, a sensation that felt simultaneously dangerous and real. He did not speak. He did not smile. He simply nodded toward the handle and released it. But in that brief, silent exchange, Lydia understood something deeper than any lesson her father intended. He wasn't seeing Silas Thorne's disgraced daughter. He was seeing a human being struggling under an arbitrary weight. His steady gaze was a challenge, forcing her to acknowledge the truth of her situation and the weakness that came from her privilege. It was a mirror reflecting her real helplessness against the machine her father commanded. Lydia spent the next few days seeking out his presence, watching him work, fascinated by the contrast between his physical power and his quiet, contained intensity. He was always reading or teaching in the few moments of rest, tracing letters in the dirt or whispering stories to the children, stories not of folklore, but of distant rebellions and the philosophers of natural rights, acts of intellectual defiance that were far more dangerous than any overt act of rebellion. She learned from the quiet network of the quarters that Caleb knew how to read, a secret skill that was a capital offense under Carolina law. One evening, after she had finished her chores, her shoulders heavy with exhaustion, she found him sitting alone near the edge of the quarters, carving a small piece of dark wood into the shape of a smooth, stylized bird. She approached hesitantly, the social rules of the main house screaming warnings in her mind, but the raw reality of the quarters had begun to dismantle those rules, replacing them with the code of survival. "The work is hard," she managed, her voice barely a whisper, the truth a profound admission of vulnerability. Caleb did not look up immediately. The silence stretched, heavy with potential consequence, with the danger inherent in their shared space. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, resonant, carrying a musical cadence she had never heard in the main house, a voice full of unburdened intelligence. "The work is meant to teach you obedience, Miss Thorne. That is what your father intends." "Did you come here to learn that?" The question was the sharpest blow she had received yet. It cut through the physical pain and went straight to the heart of her fear. "I came to escape marriage. I came to defy him." Caleb finally raised his eyes. They were luminous in the fading light. "Defiance is vanity, Miss Thorne. Obedience is survival. Here, we understand that submission of the body is often the only route to the preservation of the mind. Obedience is the greatest tool of resistance because it keeps the true master, your mind, hidden and calculating. We obey to survive the moment. You obey to prove a point. You are still playing your father's game, only with rougher pieces and a shorter timer." His words struck her like a revelation, the ultimate cold twist of the master's punishment. Her perceived defiance, the refusal of a marriage, was merely a spoiled child's tantrum within the boundaries of her privilege. His obedience was a calculated, necessary shield, preserving his mind when his body was claimed. He had seen the true game, the long game of the soul, the war against dehumanization, and she was barely at the table. This was the hook. Lydia Thorne, sent to the quarters to learn obedience, was learning the architecture of power and realizing that her father's world was just a bigger, slightly softer version of the slave cabin. The chains were different, one gilded, one iron, but the principle of ownership remained the same. She started asking Caleb questions, questions that were intellectual, desperate, spanning history, philosophy, and the law. She wasn't just observing him. She was enrolling in a terrible, vital curriculum, taught by the one man her father considered nothing more than property. The master had sent her to the quarters to break her spirit. Caleb was, instead, hardening her mind with forbidden knowledge. The path to her return was being fundamentally, terrifyingly altered. The chains that would bind her next act would not be the soft chain of marriage, nor the hard chain of the master, but a chain of her own making, forged in the heat of the quarter's silent rebellion. The month had only just begun. The true lesson was still waiting to be paid, and that payment would involve a choice far darker than any silk or lace. The following weeks became a strange, forbidden academy held under the shadow of the master's oblivious entitlement. Lydia was caught in a dangerous duality. Publicly, she was the pampered daughter enduring penance, her rough clothes and dirtied face a sign of temporary correction. Privately, she was a student of liberation, absorbing the knowledge Caleb dispensed like contraband. This double existence was a constant, nerve-wracking performance, refining her capacity for calculated deception. Their meetings were brief, covert, held near the irrigation ditch at dusk or behind the woodpile during the noon rest. Lydia used her access to the main house, her inherited privilege, now a temporary liability, as a tool for Caleb's intellectual defense. She started by bringing him small, innocent items, a piece of chalk stolen from the children's abandoned school slate, allowing him to write on flat stones. Then, a pencil stub and fragments of wrapping paper, the back covered in the fine, elegant script of his forbidden education. She risked beatings for small acts of defiance that felt immense, understanding that every small victory against the system fueled her hardening resolve. Caleb's lessons were brutal in their honesty, yet delivered with a detached clarity that forced Lydia to think politically, not emotionally. He did not teach her how to escape. He taught her why escape was necessary, tracing the legal history of the Carolina Code, detailing the exact nature of her father's political power, explaining how the economy of cotton was physically built on the legal fiction of human chattel. He would quote forgotten English law concerning property, and then contrast it with the horrifying simplicity of the slave codes, demonstrating the legal and moral sophistry of her father's world. He used the terms her father used: asset, investment, property, and showed her the mechanism of her own gilded cage, identical in principle to his own iron one. He focused on the sheer mechanics of Senator Thorne's political survival. "Your father fears only one thing, Miss Thorne," Caleb told her one evening, his voice barely audible above the chirping of the cicadas. "He fears losing control of the narrative. He is a politician, his wealth is vast, but his true strength is paper, his true wealth is ink. His public image is his lifeblood. You threaten that image by your refusal. If you use the quarters to gain mere intellectual knowledge, you have won a battle for yourself. If you use it to destroy his narrative, his public mask of righteousness, you win the war for others." Lydia began to understand the true target. She saw the main house differently now, not as home, but as a political structure held together by vulnerable laws and fragile reputation. She remembered a specific conversation with her father, weeks before her punishment, where he lamented the loss of an invaluable enslaved man named Silas, a master carpenter and foreman who had escaped 5 years earlier. Silas had been Thornwood's most valuable piece of property, possessing knowledge of the accounts and the hidden paths that ran through the low country swamps. The loss had been financial, yes, but mostly a terrible, personal embarrassment for the senator, who had been ridiculed by political rivals for losing such a key asset. The name Silas was never spoken in the house, a gaping hole in her father's history and reputation. The idea solidified in her mind, cold and sharp as broken glass. Her father had exiled her to learn obedience from the foundation of his system. She would learn how to break that foundation. She wasn't just observing Caleb. She was observing the entire, fragile architecture of the rebellion simmering beneath the surface. One rainy afternoon, huddled in the dusty shed where they stored dried tobacco, Lydia made her proposition. The month was half over. Her initial panic was gone, replaced by a ruthless, calculating clarity inherited directly from her father. "Silas," she whispered, using the forbidden name. "The carpenter who escaped 5 years ago. He was sold from Georgia, correct?" "He had family here." Caleb's head snapped up, his deep brown eyes suddenly dark with caution and fear. This was crossing the line from dangerous conversation to treasonous action, risking not just the whip but the ultimate reprisal. "You ask questions that could earn you a severe rebuke, Miss Thorne, and earn me the deepest cut of the whip, the silent one that leads to the auction block." "I am already bound by my father, Caleb," Lydia replied, meeting his gaze with the same unnerving stillness he used. "My freedom and yours is measured by the same man's control. My punishment ends in 2 weeks with a marriage that binds me forever. I cannot escape physically, but I can pay the master a different price, a price paid in his public shame." She leaned closer, speaking so low the sound was barely carried by the damp air. "I know how Silas escaped. I heard my father tell the overseer. He did not go north. He went south toward the coast, where the turpentine camps offer temporary freedom, a way to save money for the true passage to the Gulf. The knowledge of that escape route is buried in the quarters." Caleb remained motionless, the tension in his shoulders palpable. "What payment do you seek for this treason?" "No payment," Lydia said, a sharp, cold edge in her voice. "An exchange. I will not return to the main house in obedience. I will return having chosen my own fate. Silas Thorne sent me to the quarters to learn subjugation. I am returning to demonstrate the power of true ownership over myself and over the knowledge that threatens him." She paused, her eyes locking onto his. "Tell me about Silas. Tell me who he was and why he left. Tell me about the chain he left behind, the message." Caleb stared at her for a long, heavy moment. He wasn't seeing the senator's daughter anymore. He was seeing a terrifying, unpredictable new weapon, sharp and ready for deployment, one that had been forged in the very fires of the quarters. He saw the cold resolve of Sila's thorn, twisted and focused in his own daughter, aimed at his own downfall. The decision was agonizing. Trusting this white woman was risking everything the quarters held dear. But her unique privilege was the only weapon that could breach the senator's defenses. He began to speak, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur, sketching a map in the dust with the tip of his carving tool. He told her about Silas's wife, Eliza, a quiet woman who served in the laundry, a woman Silas had left behind, promising to return or send for her, a promise maintained through a coded scroll. He spoke of the tools Silas had hidden, the coded messages he left, the specific location of the scroll hidden 5 years earlier. He spoke of Silas's desperate, enduring love, the kind of human connection the Master's system was designed to crush. The conversation that followed was not merely an exchange of information. It was the birth of a terrible, intimate conspiracy. Lydia learned that Silas had left a specific, coded message hidden in the old forge, a mark only Caleb or Eliza would recognize, a signal for help or contact. And Lydia, the daughter of the Master, had the unfettered access to the entire estate, a kind of privilege the Master could never surveil because he never expected it to be used against him. Lydia's return was scheduled for 2 weeks. When she walked back up the main path, she would no longer be the obedient daughter or the defeated child. She would be an agent of revolution, carrying the knowledge that could unravel her father's control. The soft chain of marriage was waiting for her, but she had chosen a different kind of bond, one forged in the dark soil of the quarters, sealed by a shared secret and a mutual defiance. The moment of her grand performance, the ultimate climax of her father's lesson, was rapidly approaching. The final 3 days in the quarters were a blur of cold, ruthless planning. Lydia spent her final hours consolidating the knowledge gained from Caleb and executing the first, necessary step of the conspiracy. Her task was simple but treacherous, retrieving the message Silas had left 5 years prior. The old forge was located near the property line, seldom used since Silas, the skilled carpenter and blacksmith, had vanished. It was a place of oppressive heat and heavy shadows. She waited for the noon break, when Jensen, the overseer, was asleep in the shade and the field hands were scattered. Her heart hammered against her ribs, the fear of visceral, cold presence, but she moved with the practiced stealth she had learned from Mama Elma in the kitchen. She located the forge, the interior dark and smelling of sulfur and damp clay. Caleb's instructions were precise. A specific brick in the base of the chimney, disguised by a layer of soot. Lydia used the dull edge of a discarded shovel head, scraping the mortar until the brick loosened. Her soft hands were scraped raw again, but this time the pain was a grounding anchor, not a source of shame. She pulled the brick out, revealing a hollow where a small, cylindrical object was nestled. It was a piece of tightly rolled leather, waterproofed with beeswax. She hid it deep inside the coarse fabric of her shift, the solid, cold feel of it against her skin a thrilling, terrifying sensation. This was the first physical chain she carried, not a symbol of bondage, but a relic of liberation. Her next task was the exchange with Eliza. Eliza, the wife Silas had left behind, was a quiet woman in the laundry, her face perpetually marked by a deep, weary sorrow. Lydia found her alone, bent over a steaming vat of boiling water and lye. The air was thick and punishing. Lydia placed the leather scroll gently on the rough wooden table beside the lye soap. "This is for you. From Caleb," she whispered, her voice low and direct. She did not need to explain Silas. The word Silas was an unspoken covenant of hope and danger in the quarters. Eliza lifted her head, her expression blank, then her eyes fell upon the leather scroll. The weary detachment vanished, replaced by an instantaneous, consuming surge of light, a fierce, blinding love that Lydia had never seen on a human face before. It was the purest, most terrifying emotion Lydia had witnessed at Thornwood. Eliza snatched the scroll, tucking it into the safety of her bodice without a word, her hands still trembling from the shock. The parchment in her bodice was the promise of a future, the knowledge that her love was not forgotten. "He lives," Eliza breathed, a silent, profound prayer, her eyes locking onto Lydia's. "May the Lord bless the shadow that falls on this house." She saw the daughter of the master but spoke a blessing for the conspirator, the dangerous anomaly. The exchange was complete. Lydia had given Eliza the link to her lost love, thereby forging an unbreakable link between herself and the heart of the rebellion. The day of her return arrived. Senator Thorne was waiting on the veranda, sipping cool lemonade, his expression a mixture of paternal disappointment and smug triumph. He expected a defeated daughter, one who had seen the filth of the foundation and was ready to climb back into her cage. Lydia walked up the main path, but she was not the girl who had left. Her rough shift was clean, but her hands were calloused and marked with dark scars. Her posture was erect, but her gaze was level, meeting her father's with an unnerving stillness he had only seen in hardened politicians. She smelled faintly of lye and smoke, a scent that was offensive in the clean air of the main house, a deliberate contamination. "Welcome back, Lydia," the senator said, his voice dripping with condescending reassurance. "I trust your little excursion has clarified your understanding of discipline." He stood, gesturing to the parlor, ready to deliver his final lecture before the acceptance of the marriage proposal. "It has, father," Lydia replied, her voice steady, carrying the low, resonant tone she had observed in Caleb. She did not enter the parlor. She stopped directly in front of him, on the sun-drenched veranda. "I have learned exactly what true subjugation feels like. It feels like believing your chains are necessary." The senator frowned, his smile fading, unsettled by her lack of despair and her intellectual precision. "And you have chosen the soft chain of marriage, I assume." "I have chosen a chain of my own making," Lydia stated. She paused, and then performed the central, calculated act of her return. She reached into the pocket of her rough shift and pulled out a heavy, 3-foot length of iron chain, one that Caleb had cleaned and secretly supplied, the kind used to shackle the men in the field. It was dull, cold, and impossibly heavy, the perfect physical symbol of his entire system. The senator stared, appalled, not at the object itself, but at the sheer symbolic insolence of her holding it. He opened his mouth to shout, but the words died in his throat as Lydia raised her other hand and slowly, deliberately, led a man around the corner of the house and onto the veranda. It was Caleb. He was dressed in his usual field clothes, his face expressionless. He walked with his back straight, his eyes fixed forward, radiating the same unsettling stillness Lydia had come to depend on. The shock was immediate and absolute. Jensen, the overseer, sitting nearby, leaped to his feet, drawing his whip. "Jensen, stop!" the senator roared, paralyzed not by fear, but by the devastating public nature of this betrayal. He could not permit a scene of violence involving his daughter and his property on his own veranda, which was visible to the stable hands and the kitchen staff. Lydia held the end of the iron chain loosely in her calloused hand. The other end of the chain was looped around Caleb's wrist, a gesture of profound, visible ownership that inverted the entire foundation of Thornwood. "I have returned with my lesson learned, father," Lydia stated, her voice clear and carrying across the veranda. "You sought to teach me obedience by humiliation. I learned that true power is in controlling the fate of others." She gave the chain a slight, deliberate tug, a motion that was a perverse echo of her father's commands. Caleb responded, stepping forward perfectly, his silent obedience confirming the terrible illusion. "I cannot escape your ownership, father," Lydia continued, her voice heavy with scorn. "But I have learned that your system is a lie. You own the deed to my life, but you do not own my will. I choose my association. I choose my alliance. I choose the foundation of my own future. And that choice begins now." She paused, taking a breath that smelled of the harsh, vital air of the quarters, not the suffocating perfume of the house. Her climax was not an explosion of violence, but a calculated destruction of her father's public narrative. "I am returning you your property, father," Lydia said, her voice dropping to a final, cold pronouncement, "but he is no longer just Caleb. He is the chain I forged in the quarters, and through him I have chosen my path. The soft chain of marriage you offer is refused. I choose this one instead, the one that tells the truth about Thornwood." The senator was utterly broken, his gunmetal eyes wide with a pure, agonizing comprehension of the political and social disaster unfolding on his own front porch. He saw the implication. His daughter, who had spent a month among the enslaved, was now inextricably linked to them, a living, walking liability, a walking threat to his political image. The public humiliation was complete. His narrative, his control, was shattered. Lydia Thorne had returned to the main house, but she had brought the quarters with her, chained to her wrist. The silence that followed Lydia's declaration was deeper, more potent than any storm. The air crackled with the wreckage of Silas Thorne's reality. He remained frozen, his lemonade glass slipping from his nerveless fingers to shatter silently on the veranda tiles, a secondary, unimportant destruction. He was a politician, a master of control, and his daughter had just publicly declared a treasonous alliance, using his own property as the instrument of his downfall. The overseer Jensen broke the trance first, the trained brutality rising. He lunged forward, whip raised, aiming not for Caleb but for Lydia to break the dangerous, impossible chain of association. "She is the master's daughter, Jensen." Caleb's voice, a low, sudden roar, sliced through the air. The words were a calculated paradox of compliance and threat. He did not move to shield Lydia, he simply stated the undeniable social law that protected her. Jensen froze, the whip suspended. Striking Lydia, even in this state, was a death sentence from the senator. The overseer's action merely confirmed the depth of the threat. "Silence," Senator Thorne finally managed, his voice a choked, wounded croak. His face was blotchy, the color of spoiled milk, a profound sign of his internal panic. He pointed a trembling, authoritative finger at Caleb, the easiest target. "Take him, the cells. I will deal with this brute and this madness later. Lock her in her room." The senator retreated immediately, collapsing into the darkness of the parlor, seeking the soft shadows to hide the public collapse of his dominion. He did not scream or rage. He was consumed by the silent, agonizing calculation of the political damage. His daughter, his asset, was now irrevocably compromised. Her month in the quarters had not broken her. It had transformed her into a weapon aimed at his reputation. Lydia released the chain, letting the cold iron fall to the veranda with a heavy, final clang. She gave Caleb a look, a quick, sharp nod that contained 1,000 whispered conversations and a promise of action. Caleb was immediately seized by Jensen and two field hands, dragged roughly toward the small, dank jail cells near the smokehouse. He did not resist. His silent walk was the continuation of the performance. His immediate subjugation was necessary to protect the larger conspiracy and the life of Eliza. Lydia was dragged into the parlor not by force but by her mother, whose frail hands shook violently. "Lydia, what have you done? You have destroyed us. Your father will ruin you." "No, mother," Lydia said, her voice cold, devoid of the emotional hysteria her mother expected. "I have merely chosen who my true masters are. They are not father nor that fool planter. They are necessity and truth, and father fears truth more than ruin." The ultimate confrontation with her father was held later that evening, in the closed, suffocating atmosphere of his study, the room where the true power of Thornwood was brokered. Silas Thorne was hunched over his mahogany desk, the smell of burnt pride and raw fear rising from him. He immediately played his ultimate hand, the threat of complete, final destruction, using his legal authority. "You will be sent away, Lydia," he hissed, his voice raspy. "North, to an asylum. You are clearly diseased. Madness is the only explanation for consorting with property. I will tell the planters you are insane, and your alliance with the slave is proof enough to secure a legal guardianship over your estate. And I will tell the abolitionists that Senator Silas Thorne is holding a fugitive named Silas's wife, Eliza, who carries the coordinates for the turpentine camps in her bodice," Lydia retorted, hitting the perfect political target with chilling precision. Her knowledge of Silas's name, his wife, and the coded scroll, details no white woman should ever possess, was lethal. She used the lessons Caleb taught her. Politics is about leverage, not morality. The senator froze, the breath catching in his throat. The information was too precise, too dangerous. Losing his daughter was a social tragedy, having the details of a 5-year-old runaway conspiracy exposed to the northern press, linking his name to the underground and the illegal coastal escape routes, was professional ruin. The name Silas was the key, the symbol of his former embarrassment. He had lost control of his own history, and Lydia now held the ledger. "What payment do you demand for this treason?" The senator choked out, defeated, realizing the soft chain of marriage had been replaced by the iron chain of blackmail, unbreakable because it was forged from his own secrets. "I want Eliza gone, tonight, unharmed, carrying the scroll to meet her husband. Caleb released from the cells and sold immediately, out of state, far away, where he cannot be tortured for this plot and reveal the depths of my knowledge," Lydia demanded, the full scope of her conspiracy unfolding. She was bargaining for the life and hope of her new allies. "And I want the promise of that marriage dissolved. My life remains my own under your roof until I choose otherwise. You will grant me unrestricted access to the medical supplies and the quarters." The senator, seeing his political career balanced against the life of 2 slaves, conceded. He had to prioritize the narrative. No connection to abolitionists, no proof of conspiracy. The price was the dissolution of his own domestic control. He was forced to sacrifice his pride for his power. The transaction was executed in the deep hours of the night. Eliza, quiet and stunned, was sent away by wagon, carrying the coded scroll to Silas, her husband. The senator paid a substantial amount to a broker to expedite Caleb's sale deep into Mississippi, ensuring his immediate removal and separation from Thornwood and Lydia. Caleb, before being dragged onto the wagon, paused. He looked back at the main house, where a single window, Lydia's window, was illuminated. He couldn't see her, but he knew she was watching. He knew the cost. Lydia watched from the window, the harsh, metallic scent of the iron chain still clinging to her fingers. She had won the battle. She had saved the lives and the bond of Caleb and Eliza, securing their freedom through her privilege. But she had paid a terrible, irreversible price in exchange for her soul's freedom. She was now permanently exiled within her own home, the daughter who had publicly chosen alliance with the enslaved over allegiance to her father's power. The senator would never trust her, never touch her political assets, but he could never cast her out entirely for fear of what secrets she might expose. Lydia Thorne was now a shadow in the halls of Thornwood, a living testament to the rot at its core, a permanent enemy occupying the heart of the house. Her life was one of chilling isolation. She spent her days tending the sick in the quarters, a penance the senator allowed because it further distanced her from society and satisfied the bare need for medical attention, and her nights studying the law books Caleb had taught her to value, mapping out the legal pathways to liberation. She never married. She became the thorn in the side of the Thorne dynasty, the silent observer who carried the knowledge of the system's fatal flaw. The soft chain of silk and marriage was gone, replaced by the heavy, invisible chain of the responsibility she had chosen, the perpetual burden of knowing. Years later, when the first tremors of the Civil War began to shake the foundation of Carolina, Lydia Thorne remained at Thornwood, still observing, still recording, a quiet revolutionary in the heart of the enemy's camp. She never saw Caleb or Eliza again, but she knew the coded scroll passed by her hand had reached its destination. She knew that her single, treasonous choice had been the bridge between 2 enduring loves, 2 acts of defiance that cost her everything but her soul. Her solitude was the price of their freedom. The end moral is this: true freedom is not the absence of chains, but the conscious choice of which chains to bear, choosing the burden of justice over the comfort of complicity.